Welcome, everybody, to What the Bones Say. I am George, and I am introducing this episode on behalf of my buddy Robert. Today, we're going to be talking about some fun things. And this is our first episode back since before we started editing any of these. So if you're listening to this now, this is the first time we have recorded something since we got things edited. So on that note, Robert, please tell us about what we're talking about today.
I don't even remember how long ago that is since we started the last one.
It's been a hot minute.
Yeah, but it's good to be back. And today we are talking about magic, particularly in tabletop games, and how that influences pretty much everything, from worlds to character to just the general locales and settings you find yourself in, and also gameplay. It influences really every part of tabletop if you choose to have a high magic, high fantasy world, or you go with the low magic, low fantasy. So there's a lot to cover here.
Absolutely.
It's true. And kids, if you think we're talking The Gathering, take your cards and go home.
Different form of magic.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're not playing card games today. We're talking about playing tabletop games. We're not playing any today.
Yeah, we're talking about playing pretend.
Not Yu-Gi-Oh!
I love playing pretend.
Though I will say, in 5e, they do have the Ravnica book, which is the Magic the Gathering book for you to play in Dungeons and Dragons.
Which is true. And as a Magic the Gathering player, Ravnica is my favorite setting in that game. So,
Debatable.
Sir?
I'm sorry. I'm more prone to like Greyhawk.
Sir?
I am. You can fisticuff me if you wish.
This is a good segue, actually. Sage, would you like to talk about it a bit? Because I know your preferences when it comes to magic. Would you care to enlighten the rest of everybody on that?
Let's hear it. So I think it's very important to distinguish two things about magic and how magic has been portrayed in fantasy. Most of us know magic in various ways. One of the common ones is probably Harry Potter, which I would say is a high magic world. Now, there are some arguments to what high magic means and how you define high magic, but what high magic really is talking about is if magic is rare in your world, or if it's more of something that everyone has access to. For example, in Harry Potter, even though there is a world of muggles, there's also a world of wizards, and in the wizarding world, magic is not rare, it is their livelihood. And it's just basically two parallel worlds working together, which is why Harry Potter I would consider as a high magic world. Where D&D 5e also falls into that is magic is everywhere. By the new way Faerun has been set up, how the Sword Coast has been set up, you can go and buy magic items. So we are looking at a world where magic is almost like a science, where it's accessible to everyone. People have various forms of magic, and these various forms help develop how the world is created and how people function throughout the world. Low magic, which is what I've kind of talking about, where Greyhawk is a lower form of magic than Ravnica. It still has its high magical elements, but low magic has more of this nitty and gritty feeling to it, where magic is only controlled by the few. Magic is very rare. There's a lot of stigma against magic. In some very popular works such as Game of Thrones and Conan the Barbarian, those that control magic are usually in a place of power or very reclused from the world. They either hide in force or they move into positions of power where they use their magic. Like in Conan the Barbarian, a lot of sorcerer kings arise from their ability to use magic, especially in the movie where Conan is fighting against Thazagul, I think his name was.
I don't watch Conan.
Yeah.
I just know Arnold is in it.
Yeah,
Arnold does his
yeah,
Arnold
yeah.
voices.
I'm trying to remember who. It's the James Earl Jones plays as the sorcerer, and he does a fantastic job of capturing a Conan type sorcerer. But those worlds where magic is not prominent as much as other things are what we consider low magic. And that's why I think, Cody, you like that high magic flavor, where for me, I like more of a low magic, and we can get more into the details of what low magic consists of and what high magic consists of.
Yeah, I do. I do really like a high magic setting. It's like what you said about magic being science. As a person, I'm very captivated by physics. Captivated by physics, and like you think about the sun, right? That's a big ball of fire just out there in space doing its thing, and like that's magic to me, dog. It could barf a sun ray at us that blows up the whole planet, like.
That's true.
I don't know. That's crazy. One kind of point too I want to point out, and I'm sure that we can touch on too, is the Harry Potter world is an interesting one, because I feel like that kind of shows how I guess magic almost as a literary device, where I think if that Harry Potter was a book or a story that took place primarily in the Muggle world, that's a low magic setting.
Yeah.
Like,
If you're also considering it from a standpoint of like story wise, how it plays a role, like magic is literally the Deus Ex Machina of like Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Like it is the reason, like, oh, all this stuff is happening, and then all of a sudden, huge plot change because magic, you know?
And to tie that into tabletop games, magic informs the players, which in turn informs how the story is going to play out. Magical world informs the type of magic the players have at their disposal. It's the difference between casting a 5th level fireball like it's nothing versus trying to save your 1st level fireballs in case you need them later on because you're fighting a witch and that's all you got.
Yeah. It's I feel like when it comes to D&D, especially it reminded me of what you were saying, Sage. Like if you are in a low magic world where magic is much more scarce and rare, I feel like, and especially I like thinking about it from like a mechanical perspective, you know, like how that influences combat and stuff like that. Like if you're in a low magic world, then if you encounter someone who has magic, usually you don't want to mess with them, you know?
Yeah, and going off of combat's a great example of how magic affects the world. In a low magic setting where the few and the powerful use magic, or if magic has these incredible drawbacks, which is a big trick a lot of people use in writing stories with magic, as well as developing a good tabletop RPG world with limitations, a good game too. I have some games listed here that have big limitations to magic. D&D 5e doesn't really have that except by class. But there are certain spells that do have drawbacks. The biggest one I can think of is the wish one. When you don't use the wish spell correctly, you could kill your character.
Yep.
But in other games like Forbidden Lands, every time you cast a spell, there is a chance, no matter what you do, you could even safe cast, and there's still a chance if it's a high enough level spell to cause yourself to have a terrible effect, which makes magic rarer in a game point because you're only going to do it in dire situations. In combat, when you have everyone casting fireballs, what's the point of a spear?
It's true.
Your entire army is going to shift. If you have a bunch of people who can cast spells, the idea of having people just rush in with swords and spears and armor becomes irrelevant. It is basically kind of what happened when in the Crimean War, these riders charged machine guns. The English charged the Russian machine guns. They got obliterated. Their cavalry did not manage to get to the line. So that's what you're thinking about. You're thinking about how magic is going to influence the world. If everyone can do it, there's no point to it. So in a game point, immediately you're going to be looking at how are the daily things in my life, the things that are controlled in our life by either sciences or nature itself, going to be altered by the use of magic.
Yeah. Yeah, and it definitely influences a lot of the culture of the world, you know, and when it comes to fighting in wars and stuff, I was especially thinking of that, like, you know, swords and maces, you know, like physical weapons versus magic, because at that point, it's just like, okay, how many spell slots do we have to throw with these, you know, physical based, you know, fighters, barbarians, all that sort of deal. Or if you're both wielding magic, then it's just a war of attrition. It's like who's going to run out of spell slots first, who has more people and therefore more spell slots to just whip at people. But yeah.
On top of that, too, that also puts into perspective, what can you do to make the average swordsman, the average spearsman, the average warrior stand on par with a wizard or a sorcerer or a warlock? What can you do from a game system perspective, from a game mechanic perspective, to make those guys to be able to compete with the wizard who can cast Wish?
Yeah.
Like, it's hard, and there's a reason why in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons people go and they play, and you're playing as a ranger, you get to 20th level as a ranger, and it's like, hey, I just got this really big cat, and this guy is casting meteors from the sky and obliterating everything. What gives?
Woo!
And you start getting into that, and their way of combating that is we get classes like the Echo Knight, and it's like, hey, I might not be casting meteors from the sky, but I got 2 of me, and we're really fast and badass. So, like, what is the other guy going to do when 3 of me gang up on this dude because I have 2 magical clones? So you start getting into like that territory where you start needing to invent things by necessity to keep up with your magical narrative that you're trying to persist into your game.
Yeah. Yeah. And even that, like when it comes to like 5e and you talk like more mechanics type of deals, like what makes other classes able to like stand on their 2 feet against like, you know, a wizard or something casting like Wish and meteors and all that, like you're saying. And it's, you know, if you think of your stereotypical wizard or magic caster, usually, yeah, they can cast all these spells that deal a lot of damage, but in exchange, usually they're a lot squishier, a lot less, you know, health, and their AC is usually lower, like naturally at least.
Oh, yeah. As a
But-
veteran wizard player, I can confirm. And on that record, too,
Yeah.
I love magic in games, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, if you look at what's on screen right now, and you'll see the 4 skulls, little fun tidbit, I am the one with the wizard staff on it. The rest, I'll let you figure that out on your own. But wizard is my favorite class in like D&D, Pathfinder, anything. Whatever the magic user is, that's my guy. However, there's give and takes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about developing either your own world or if you're using a pre-existing world for your game, you also have to look at systems, as systems really define how magic is going to affect your world. So, for example, we've talked a lot about D&D 5e right now because it's one of the most popular games out there. But D&D 5e is set in the idea that you could make it low magic, but if you make it low magic, you got to be smart on how you make it low magic. Do you limit levels so that only wizards go up to level 5 like everyone else? Or do you only allow the player characters, which is what I like to do to keep my worlds low magic, only the player characters and other big NPCs are the ones that cast spells. So when you have that wizard's duel, when you have a lich in their dark tower fighting against the player characters, there's a reason why there's not a bunch of other sorcerers around the lich. There may be 1 or 2, but it's because these are the ones that have discovered the arcane arts. But when we look at other systems like Forbidden Lands has a great balance system where even your sorcerers are going to use a sword or a spear. The world is influenced by magic. There are sorcerers that still rule in power, but it has more of a sword and sorcery flavor to it, where it has a low to mid magic type style, where the world is not always influenced by magic, where D&D, you see people using magic for daily tasks all the time. I would also say games like Symbaroum or Demon Lord, you are a high magic setting, but have darker tones to it and have more consequences with their magic. And you see the consequences. You're exploring those consequences. Shadow of the Demon Lord, there's a Demon Lord that has been summoned. The demons are all over, and partly due to the use of magic, to the abuse of magic. And then the setting of Dark Sun, which was very popular in 4th E, and it had earlier versions that are blinking at the moment. That is basically what happens when too much magic is used. Your whole world goes into apocalyptic state. So it's very important to really think about either if there's a limit on magic, and if there is or is not, how does that influence the world, and how does that influence how cultures develop and how your character develops?
Can I bring up Fori real quick? Just real
Go for
quick,
it.
because you brought it up, and I've been thinking about that throughout this whole entire conversation.
Don't do it. Don't do
I know,
it. Back
I
up.
know.
Back
I
up.
have
Don't
to do it. I have to do it. No,
Dude,
put your spear down.
we don't even
put
have
your
fans.
Spear down.
We don't
Put
even
it down.
have-
No,
we-
no, no. I don't want to see it.
hold on.
No.
I'm putting down my +2 card.
No,
right now.
No.
Now
Don't
get my
do
next.
it. Don't do it.
Guys.
George, my +2 spear will smite you.
No, I have some things to say. 4th edition. I know. 4th
Famous
edition.
last words.
Wah. I know. So with that game in particular, I feel like that is the nexus of this discussion, which is a conclusion I just came to suddenly, in a sense that they're like, everybody has like a power in this. Everybody has like magic. How do we give the normal guys the ability to fight that? And let's give everybody something called powers. So for those of you who have not played 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons,
You're lucky.
e-
You're lucky.
some would disagree with you. There's some like hardcore 4E players out there. But
It's called WoW, actually.
it's called WoW. So it's very
Wow.
World of Warcraft. Like every class gets a power. And that goes with wizards. Wizards don't get spells. They get powers, abilities that are classified as a spell. And that's their weird way of solving that, which is, like say what you will about that. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, at least they tried.
Yeah, they tried. I mean, I don't know if that's what they were going with when they made 4th edition. Probably not. I just know that as Robert, who I think just said it, WoW is very World of Warcraft like. So yeah, that's the main note that I wanted to make, is that 4th edition did have that. And it was a weird situation where everybody has powers, whether they were magical or not.
Yeah.
Like everybody had abilities and everybody was these hulking like gods, magic or not. It's like, I am the fighter and I can fight. And the wizard's like, well, I have my spell. And it's like, well, that's a power. And you want to know something? I have power too. Yeah. And then they would wreck house. So I just wanted to bring that up. And, that's not discredit to 4E and that's not credit to 4E. So just take these comments as you will.
Yeah, God, we don't even have fans yet, and we got added. I like the idea of when I guess like I always enjoy the idea when it comes to magic of it making it hard, because I feel like in D&D it does feel it's very pervasive, but it feels like it's easy to get into. In the lore, I always like the idea that like magic is just, it's hard. Like I've always dreamed for a world that I want to personally build. I like magic to me is a very mathematical thing. It all, like everyone who can cast magic has taken time to learn sort of the geometric shape of things, and they cast spells. Everyone can do it a different way because they just have to find the pattern that works for them. And kind of correlates to like a fireball or something. And, in order to do that, you have to dump so much time into like old esoteric teachings and stuff like that, where in D&D 5e, especially like the Forgotten Realms, magic feels like something a 4-year-old kid could go out and like pick up a pamphlet on. Oh, I can press the digitation.
Here's how you cast magic missile.
I made it.
Speaking of, what do you think of material components?
They have their place, but the problem that usually comes up in games is who tracks them.
Yeah.
You do have those hardcore DMs, and hats off to you if you do track your material components. That's another level of gaming that my caveman brain cannot do.
And responsible players.
Yes, and responsible players. Responsible players indeed. Actually, yes, players, you should be tracking your own resources. It gets annoying as a DM. Good, thank you, George.
I always
Yes.
do that.
Yeah. So material components can have a really cool effect to the game. for example, let's say you want to make a potion of fire resistance. Well, then your DM or you could come up with an idea about how are we going to make that potion. If you guys collaborate, maybe you have to take the tongue of a dragon or the dragon clans and make them into a potion. But the problem that comes into play is most DMs I know, including myself, opt for the gold option, where you either sacrifice an amount of gold equal to the worth of the material components, or you just say, I'm not going to use the material components at all, and you're just going to cast the spell. And I think specifically 5e, it does lose some of the balancing mechanic, but the material components can really slow down the game unless you really find a really cool way to develop material components.
That's why they have the spell casting focus. And sometimes people try to come up with their cool spell casting focus, like, oh, I got gloves instead of a wand, and I use gloves.
I use my belly button ring.
Hey, magic ring.
Oh,
magic
no.
ring, man.
You just like squeeze the belly button wing and go boo, boo, boo.
It casts fireball.
I don't want to think about that because fireball, you need bat guano.
I mean,
That's one of the material components for fireball is bat guano.
Just rub it on the ring. It
I'd rather
gets
just
really
cast
in
the
there.
spell.
I got more than lint in there.
This is going in
yeah.
a very uncomfortable direction.
Okay.
I'd rather just cast the spell, right?
Yeah.
And like say, screw it to any material component. Just like, okay, here's my spell slot. That's the component that gets used. It's not like, oh, I went out and got this stuff. Like for me, like mechanically speaking, magic can have story when you are trying to cast something very difficult, and you can definitely make a quest out of it to go get this thing to cast this ultra powerful spell. But like, I'm like more so like, okay, yeah, we're going to use magic in this super epic way during this fight, and it's going to be great. And maybe you cast something crazy and you suffer from it. Like you were kind of saying, like there's some sort of drawback to it that you impose on the player that's not like explicit in the rules, but like for a story purpose, you know?
Right. And with Dungeons and Dragons 5e specifically, that's hard to do. It's not impossible. You can get creative. That's the nice thing about rule sets. They're guidelines on how to play. But when you are picking out a tabletop system and you're trying to decide what flavor you want, it's like you're baking a cake. Do I want chocolate cake with vanilla frosting? Do I want chocolate cake with peanut butter frosting? Do I want vanilla cake? Do I want a cake that doesn't have any cake at all?
I want mint.
A mint cake?
That's
Yeah, I want mint.
I think you're the only one.
No, I want mint.
See?
All right.
Cody and I want mint cake. Deliver.
I want chocolate.
I know a person.
Are you the person?
You are the person.
Well,
He
okay.
does. Sage
you
is the
literally
person.
are the person.
Sage works at a bakery.
Yeah.
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 Yep.
Tell him the address.
So, anyways,
It's a good bakery.
I think something we haven't brought up yet is, and this kind of goes back to what Cody was saying about the math, was how does magic get countered just on a mechanical standpoint, not even in terms of like the world. And something we haven't talked about yet is magical items.
Ooh, yes.
That's a can of worms because it's like, it's the difference between like, hey, I can cast fireball and do like whatever, like 10d10 of like damage or something. Or, you know, I have a character who has this long sword that does like 2d8 damage or something, but it's enchanted and it does like 4d12 necrotic damage, like, you know, something crazy like that.
Yeah, so I think going off of magic items is going to be very important right now because it connects into flavor. Because magic items in most stories are these incredible artifacts that date to a time before the story happens, were made by gods, were gifts. A great one is Excalibur. If we think of Excalibur, it's a lady of the lake, this fey spirit rising up, offering this magical sword that makes King Arthur immortal. These are what magic items are. But this is what happens with magic items in like Baldur's Gate, right? Mm-hmm. Baldur's Gate is an excellent game. And it has the video game mechanic where you're always buying the next magic item. Mm-hmm. Guess what? This +1 sword only lasts so long. I'm getting the +2 sword. Oh, that +2 sword just went out of date. I gotta get the +3. Oh, the +3 didn't have psychic damage. You're selling all these swords that have backstories.
Or you're letting Gale eat them.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, Gale's just like munching down on like artifacts. It'd be like the same thing as if Sting Gale walked over and went, what a snack. That's a
Gale
Gondolin
goes over
blade.
and he just goes, Gale is hungry.
Gale wanted munchy munch.
Well, it's like in D&D, it's like you could get a pair of pants where it's like every time you fart, it smells like roses. Like it's just so easy to get magic.
Yeah, and it ruins a story flavor. It ruins character development because one of the things I find a lot of value in, and I think a lot of other DMs can agree with me, is the importance of having a backstory to a magical weapon.
Yep.
For example, George, do you remember the Blade Lunaris?
How could I forget?
Yeah, so the Blade Lunaris is this magical weapon that has been passed down for generations by the greatest heroes. And eventually his character gets this. They had a few other magic items, but there was no magic shops. When you have magic shops, suddenly you have capitalism with magical items. And it takes away... It is. It's like. Well, we have the next best thing. We have the next best thing.
Here you go.
Do you want a +1 dagger, or do you want a +1 dagger with some D4? But that'll be extra money. Oh, why do you even go into the dungeon to get the magical artifact where you just could work a day job and go and buy your magic weapon?
Or you use persuasion and deception tactics.
Yeah, or you just rob him.
Yeah, rob him blind too.
Yeah.
He's not going to stop you.
And then they can say, "Oh, but there's a magic spell on it." But then magic becomes this wall.
Yeah. Rob the shopkeeper. He's not going to cast wish.
Well, that's why, and I've spoken a bit about my setting before on this podcast, but in my setting, Syndonia, that I made, magic in it is something that's coveted a lot, and it exists, but it's from this old era. So a lot of the people who have it now are either rich or it's lost in some tomb. That's why that in my Syndonia game, Sage, when you played it, I'm sure you'll remember that you stole some magic items off of this asshole, this rich asshole.
Yep. Yeah, no, I didn't steal it. I won in fair combat.
Yeah, I recall you going into his office and
I won in fair combat.
Sure. Fair combat.
History is written by the victors. I was the victor. Won in fair combat. But yeah, I think, Cody, you've played a few sessions of Dungeons and Dragons with us, as well as the Forbidden Lands. And for the most part, I think for the Forbidden Lands, there hasn't been any magic items yet in the story. And do you think that's hindering the characters, or do you think it's actually causing more adventure opportunities? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So Forbidden Lands to me is kind of in the same vein as the way that I would describe Game of Thrones, where it's less magic at all and more like almost supernatural. Like Forbidden Lands to me feels like the atmosphere of the game is magical, but there's no like day-to-day magic. It's this larger, more abstract, spooky thing, which I really appreciate. And it's like the same way in Game of Thrones. Like throughout most of the series, like you're not like no one has it. Right? Like all Game of Thrones is like a story about political intrigue. And then like slowly just the shit, like I guess like the first time we really get to see it's like with the dragons at the end of season 1. Oh God, spoilies. But
it's okay. I didn't watch it.
okay.
The show's been out for like how long now? Since 2012.
There's dragons.
And there was books before that. So you're good,
Go
Cody.
So
read a
it's
book,
like-
kids.
So it's like this idea where like the magic feels truly fantastic. Like throughout the show of Game of Thrones, like all like the White Walkers, the dragons, all of that stuff feels as big as it does because magic is so absent. And it's the same way in Forbidden Lands. Like we go through this, we'll go through like an entire 5 sessions, and then someone like you get a druid character that eventually gets to spend all his willpower on one elemental spell, and it feels insane and fantastic, and like you really get to be a part of something.
Mm. Yeah, and I think what could really benefit a lot of DMs and players is when magic becomes that scarce and that mystical element is returned. When magic becomes a science, it kind of numbs it down. And what I mean by that is when we are able to explain where magic comes from and how magic is used, and everyone's using magic, it numbs down the mystical element of that magic, the unknown. And there's an excitement in the unknown. Why does my character have this power? Why does my character use this power? How am I able to use this power? Where does it come from? It allows for players to start to manipulate the story in a game in a way it couldn't have been manipulated before. And you could even have the premise, which a lot of other authors did in their books, where science is magic, that science has advanced so far that to those who have not experienced it, it is magic. And there's plenty of authors that all their names are blanking at the moment because that's how my brain works. It's how it goes. But there's a lot of authors who took that idea that if science gets so advanced, it becomes magic, that still keep that wow whenever something grand happens with the use of magic, with that mystical element that cannot be created through human hands.
Can I play devil's advocate for a bit?
Do it. You won't.
No.
I will. So I think that could still happen in a very high magic setting. I'm kind of indifferent about this, to be completely honest with you, as long as it is done correctly in a way that feels good. So, for example, in a high fantasy game where there's magic everywhere, you can still kind of get that wonder, but you're going to have to find unique ways of trying to get that to happen in a very challenging, like if you're up for that challenge, awesome.
Yeah.
But there's ways. So, for example, another is like magic is abundant and there's all these common spells, but in order to learn something deeper, I must go to places that I didn't think of before to learn these esoteric magics. So it's like forbidden spells. Like, oh, I have to go to this abandoned civilization if I want to learn how to shoot fire from my hands or something like that. That's just an example. I don't know.
It's funny you said that because that just reminded me of that episode of Avatar where they go to learn firebending.
Exactly.
Like the true way.
That's a great example
Yeah.
because Avatar: The Last Airbender is a very high magic setting. Magic is abundant. It's everywhere. People are literally wielding it with their hands, and that's how they fight each other.
Yeah.
And the fighters in that world, too, are also crazy, and they can keep up. But it does it in a very interesting way that still captivates. So if you go and run a high magic fantasy setting, there's nothing wrong with that. You're just presenting yourself with a different set of challenges as opposed to just somebody being like, well, I got a high magic setting. Well, it's a lot of work to make it interesting. So my player wants to be able to have this 7th level spell, and I think I'm just gonna give it to him. I don't want to go through the trouble. There's a difference between that attitude and like, oh, he has this really high level spell that he doesn't normally have access to. Let's send him on a quest or journey to be able to understand the magic that he wields better, and in order to hone it in a sense that he can cast it without issue. Like there's an issue between that and just like giving it to a guy.
Yeah. Can I give an example again from like the world that I'm building that I think kind of
Please do.
expresses the wonder? So
How dare you share?
yes,
I am insulted.
I don't have the sharing stick yet. Give it to me.
Okay, fine.
Okay, so in this world, it's called Khaldun, and there are magic. It's almost like our world where there are different organizations or cults or secret societies, like how we have the Order of the Hermetic Dawn, or like the followers of Thelema, or like the Blavatskyites out there doing their weird thing that they do with their 7 spheres. It creates this like feeling where it is there, but it is secluded and hard to get into, because in order to get into these things, like you need to have studied. And there is one organization in this world where they wanted to connect on this landmass of Khaldun. It's huge. Like, I don't know. I wanted to make just a giant land space where everyone could have fun and live. So it's like Asia, Africa, and like the Americas all connected, and it's huge.
The Pangaea.
Yeah. And so, people can't just get across there, and teleportation isn't readily accessible. That level of magic is very powerful, and like teleporting is not an easy thing to just be able to do. So the way that they did this is a cabal essentially of wizards banded together to do this massive ritual. And what they did was they got a globe that showed the continent, and they drew geometric shapes that connected all the cities. And they had to be very specific in order for the spell to work. And they create these at like the boundary of each city where these roads were going to go, they created these sort of beginning blocks, and then they cast the spell, and all of those roads like magically connected together because they drew the shapes out. And it was like this huge mathematical process where they had to be very exact.
Yeah.
I ran out of breath.
I mean, hey, you had a lot to say.
No.
No, and I'm not saying high magic is bad. In fact, one of my favorite stories of all time was told in a high magic world. You know, Arda, or Middle Earth, is a high magic world, but in the story, magic is limited to those of great power or a descendant. You know, most hobbits don't cast spells. You don't have Frodo sitting down and just shooting a lightning bolt out of his ass. You know, it's this a flavor. This like really what you're talking about is how you're going to temper that flavor with magic. For example, Stormbringer, which is the game for Elric, the offshoot of like taking the world of Elric and putting it into a role-playing game, as Stormbringer. Stormbringer has a lot of magic too, but it's more of like you're traveling through planes into different worlds and you're seeing these different cultures and you're having a lot of interesting interactions while also having a darker side to your role-playing. And it's a game I definitely want to check out more because Elric is a very fascinating tale. Whether you like the character or not is a debate unto itself.
Yeah.
But the world that was built by Michael Moorcock is excellent. And it creates that mystical feeling when you travel to a new dimension.
Yeah. The Elric of Melniboné books and stories are a wild read. He is morose, but the universe is very interesting.
Yeah.
Something to say about interesting universes that use magic is that I really like it when they delve into the horrors of magic and what that could entail, because it can get pretty messy with what you can do. And if you're imaginative enough, it can get pretty scary.
Necromancy.
Yeah. No, necromancy can get really messed up. And I actually have a question for you guys.
Okay.
I've been thinking about this all day before we recorded.
Okay.
Is H.P. Lovecraft, one, do you think it has magic? And two, do you think it's low magic or high magic?
I almost put that in the same realm of like feeling supernatural. Low magic, I guess.
Low magic?
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely more supernatural, and things that are supernatural aren't necessarily magical. I think they just kind of exist, and like things like when you think of like Cthulhu and like shit like that, you know, like that's I think of it more as there's these things that exist in this world and they just have the abilities to do these things. It's not necessarily magic as much as it's like, and I was just thinking of this, like when you go into D&D and you go to the different planes and stuff, are the things in those different planes magic because it's what's not normal to us, or is it just like, oh, that's just how things are?
Yeah, it just popped into my head because some of the stories, like the story about Dagon and the person who goes out into sea and suddenly is transported into this other world and sees this terrible creature. To me, I don't know if you could label it as magic because it's like kind of what you said, Cody. It's supernatural.
Yeah.
Or if it's like a subsect of magic, it's kind of this magic that is so, or this power that is so incomprehensible to humans that we perceive it as magic, which kind of goes back to if science gets advanced enough, you could have a magic setting based around science.
Well, I think that kind of ties into, going back to 5th edition again, the warlock. I think in D&D, when you start to boil it down a little bit, it's like, okay, where do we put the magic we don't understand? Okay, we're just going to give it to the warlock because I have the Great Old One pact, and that's I don't understand what's happening. There's magic. It's coming from somewhere. It's coming from someone. I don't know who, but it's a Great Old One. And I think Matt Mercer in campaign 2 of Critical Role handled that type of magic pretty well. And spoiler alert, I'm not going to get into it too much, but still spoiler alert for those of you watching campaign 2 who haven't watched it completely through yet.
That's me. Hi.
You?
Yep, me.
Cody, cover your ears.
Fuck, the headphones are in the way.
You have to take off the headphones, Cody.
Now.
Oh, Cody.
Now,
Cody.
I live here.
Don't bring me back to kindergarten, please. This is my escape.
All right. Should I mention it? I don't want to spoil this for Cody here.
Yeah, go for it. I'm
Okay.
not like a spoilers guy.
Sure. So Molly Mock comes back at the end of campaign 2 after getting killed, but there's a new person inhabiting the body of Molly Mock. It's the guy before him called Lucian. And Lucian is connected to all sorts of weird, strange, otherworldly, demiplane, Lovecraftian creatures that are fueling him, and he wants to get rid of those creatures. I believe, Critical Role fans, critters, please don't kill me if I'm getting this wrong. It's been a while since I watched campaign 2.
Critters.
And that's what they call them. And he becomes this like Lovecraft god at the end of it, and he gets all of his shit from esoteric magic, and he does not have godly magic powers. He's not getting it from a deity. He's getting it from an other, if you will. And I thought that was just handled really well.
Well, the one thing that I know about Molly Mogg, I'm on episode 40, so I do know that he died at least. The one thing I will say about Molly Mogg, so much sexy art of Molly Mogg from what has been described to me. Just so much shirtless tattoo pics.
I'm not even surprised by
A
that.
lot of people are big fans of Molly Mock.
I bet it's all deviant.
Molly
there.
Mock was a good character.
Yeah, very cool.
Very, you know,
I will say Caduceus, though, rules.
I love
Yeah.
Caduceus. I'm kind of partial to Caduceus. He's just a cool guy.
Yeah, you had me at the name Caduceus.
Yeah.
He's just kind of like this really cool guy, you know?
Yeah, with pink hair. I'm jealous.
now I'm going to ask another question.
Do what you want.
Don't.
Okay, sorry guys, I got to go.
Okay, bye.
We
Bye
know you're my
now.
ride.
My mom's calling me. I got to go.
Bye. See you soon.
Yeah, bye.
Well-
So my next question, to really kind of pick your brains, because I love this topic. I love seeing what people think, is do you think in a world magic should be the solution to all mundane problems? And what I mean by that is not problems like, oh, I don't want to go to the grocery store, I'm just going to summon food, but kind of like not problems that we have in our real life. So I wouldn't use the word mundane, that's the wrong word, but problems we have in our real life that are very serious, that in a magical world could become mundane. For example, a famine. If you have a high magical world, what's your solution to not solving the famine by summoning food, then using magic again? So, like, do you think magic should be a solution to everything? Or do you think if you have a world, the limits to magic should also prevent things that are very serious in our world, like famines and droughts, that really affect how cultures and people survive and develop? Should those be kind of put aside, or should they like have a reason that's other than magic? Or do you think the magic famine can't be stopped by magic is okay?
So this is interesting. I actually find this very fascinating. So like magic, right, is I mean, in some settings, I guess it could be this just like unending resource, right? But I think in Forgotten Realms in particular, like magic is a resource that pulls on a thing called the weave, and if you fuck it up too bad, everything breaks. Now, it's interesting to think about real life in terms like, so I saw a clip of Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about why we don't desalinate ocean water to just get all the fresh water we need. And it's just because we don't have, like, there's other things we could be doing. Like money can go to other things. So I guess in any world that has magic, like we'd have to think of like, the real world implications of different situations. And as much as magic might be there, like it can't just be a deus ex machina if everyone isn't working together. Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
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 Cause like in order for us to like, to go totally green energy, we need all these different like organizations and people to pull together and work together. And if we think of magic in a similar way, where it's like one person can't draw enough of one resource to do something drastic, you would need to get, all the most powerful wizards to be able to work together. And I think like, the human component of it is probably enough to fuck that up for someone.
For me, it's how it's handled. So, sci-fi example, Star Trek. When people are flying around on the Enterprise or whatever, they have ways to generate water on their ships. That solves that major resource problem. However, there's other things about Star Trek that makes it more interesting, where you're not thinking about the resources because they have other problems that they need to worry about, whether it's a Borg or Klingons or Gorn, the weird lizard guy who throws rocks at people.
I love the Gorn. The original Gorn has a soft place in my heart.
The Gorn are phenomenal. I love the Gorn.
I do love that original episode with Kirk, man, and they got into such a tussle.
Yeah, they did. It was a hard fight, but there's other things in that world that makes it interesting. And it's like, okay, this resource is solved. There's actually a lot of things solved in this world, but Star Trek explores humanity. What's so funny, Cody? Is there something wrong with what I said?
How does Captain Kirk's shirt always rip in the same way?
It's how his like chest kind of bursts out as he's like sending his Kirk punches.
That's the magic, friends.
That's what it's all about.
I think it
chesticles,
has to do with how William Shatner likes to speak.
He's got a way with words. Yep.
Yeah. Well, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, on that note, thank you for listening to everybody. Hope you enjoy this episode and have a great night. And don't forget, that is what the bones say.
Yes.
Bones.
Yes.